Africa wakes up to information of an alleged coup in Côte d'Ivoire. But this is even confusing because it involves Ivorians taking to the streets to show their tiredness against President Alassane Ouattara, who is nowhere to be seen. Are these mass protests in Ivory Coast marking the end of President Ouattara? But why they want him down? Ever since 2011 presidential election, which was full of chaos that, even so, Ouattara's competitor Gbagbo, arrested due to forcing himself into power without winning the election, President Alassane Ouattara promised a new Côte d'Ivoire. Ouattara was then left to look toward the onerous tasks of restoring economic stability, alleviating the humanitarian crisis, and reunifying the country, which had remained divided since the 2002-03 civil war. In a need to foster reconciliation, he called for a cessation of fighting and promised to form a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate criminal acts and human rights abuses allegedly committed by both sides. He later requested that the International Criminal Court also investigate the post-election violence, a thing that was promising. As time passed, criticism started to pour in, blaming President Ouattara that in spite of his earlier pledges, he had not yet done enough to address the need for reconciliation and justice in the wake of the 2010 election crisis. In October 25, 2015, presidential election, he was looked at as bringing back games of the 2010 election by President Gbagbo, as some opposition candidates had withdrawn from the election and called for a boycott, where more than 50% of voters turned out, and Ouattara was re-elected with almost 84% of the vote. President Ouattara's problems started to rise in 2016 when he initiated the process of drafting a new constitution, one he asserted would usher in a period of peace after the years of conflict that the country had experienced. A move that critics emphasized was for Ouattara to use the new constitution as an instrument to consolidate power. In the years before the October 2020 presidential election, there was uncertainty about whether Ouattara would attempt to stand for a third term, the legality of which was debated, after all the changes he had made in the constitution of Côte d'Ivoire. The dramatic death of Amadou Gon Coulibaly, then the country's prime minister who became the RHDP's candidate for the election, to replace President Ouattara, who had promised to do not come for the third term, led him into presidency for the third time after the 2020 election, which had been boycotted by opposition and others. Due to all that chaos, President Alassane Ouattara opened a new chapter of rising criticism in the country, which even involves the new wave of revolutionists who don't promise but act immediately. Now, the game of geopolitics knocks in for President Alassane Ouattara. Now, 2025 kicks in. All eyes have been on him whether he is coming back for the fourth term, a move that the Ivorians are tired, hence this just-to-go alleged coup and mass protests in Côte d'Ivoire. Whether this is true or not, there is something Africans are tired of. The head of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traore, frequently accuses Ivory Coast on welcoming all the destabilizers of his country, adding there is a problem with the authorities in Abidjan. With series of coup attempts on the captain that a number of Africans have been furious about, they are pointing all their fingers on President Alassane Ouattara, whom they look at as a puppet of Western powers that is accused of destabilizing West Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traore clarifies that he has evidence of destabilization orchestrated against his country by France and supported by Benin and Ivory Coast. We have nothing against the Ivorian people, but we do have something against those who run Ivory Coast. We say it, and we'll say it again. There is indeed a center of operations in Abidjan to destabilize our country, Traore said in an interview in Ouagadougou, the nation's capital. Burkina Faso alleged that even just recent coup attempt on him originated in neighboring Côte d'Ivoire's capital, Abidjan, that followed the arrest and dismissal of several army officers within Burkina Faso. Once a pivotal player in West Africa, Côte d'Ivoire is having to confront emerging challenges in its neighborhood, driven by shifts in governance mainly in the neighboring Sahel. Côte d'Ivoire remains one of the few steadfast Western allies in Francophone West Africa, but this increasingly makes it a regional outlier, unable to mediate between the Sahel and the ECOWAS. Despite Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara consistently pledging to maintain constructive relations with leaders, President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta of Mali, and Abdourahmane Chiani of Niger have sought to isolate Côte d'Ivoire and portray its advocating a hardline approach against the revolution, including economic sanctions and the use of force to overturn coup d'état. Côte d'Ivoire stands out as one of the few Francophone African countries openly aligned with the West, amidst a backdrop where several regimes, both democratic and military, have embraced a sovereigntist narrative. Once a regional giant, Côte d'Ivoire's diplomatic influence has waned over the past 3 years, leaving it somewhat isolated as a regional hegemon in Francophone Africa. As Côte d'Ivoire's influence has waned, Senegal, another key regional player, has grown in stature. The country has also undergone an ideological shift, with the administration of Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Ousmane Sonko espousing skepticism of the West and its values, a stance which resonates more closely with the Sahel leaders. Africans in and outside the continent are carrying one voice of sovereignty as the key to a new rejuvenated Africa that has been covered in unending conflicts. They are contented with Captain Ibrahim Traore, a charismatic 37-year-old who has skillfully built the persona of a pan-Africanist leader determined to free his nation from what he regards as the clutches of Western imperialism and neo-colonialism. His message has resonated across Africa and beyond, with his admirers seeing him as following in the footsteps of African heroes like Burkina Faso's very own Thomas Sankara. Even some African elites believes that his messages reflect the age we are living in, when many Africans are questioning the relationship with the West and why there is still so much poverty in such a resource-rich continent.
Qu'ils ont envoyé au charbon, je vais leur dire que c'est terminé.